A 13-year-old boy got slapped in first class. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He didn't even blink. But 6 minutes later, $1.1 billion vanished. 4 airports suspended service, and no one ever forgot that flight. If you're watching this, tell us where you're watching from, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a warning. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even obvious. Until it was. A single crack shattered the quiet hum of first class like a lightning strike. The kind that slices through silence and leaves something hanging in the air. Shock, confusion, maybe even guilt. Everyone turned, and there he was. Cairo Ellis, 13 years old, seated in 1A. Head turned slightly to the side. One cheek flushed a bright, stinging red. He didn't flinch, didn't raise his hands, didn't say a word. Across from him stood the flight attendant, Lynn Bradford, blue uniform stiff as her posture, hands still half raised, as if even she couldn't believe what she'd just done. A hush spread like fog across the cabin. Nobody moved. Cairo slowly blinked. Not in pain, not in shock. Almost like he was disappointed, not surprised, just disappointed. He sat up straighter, as if to shrink the moment into silence. His notebook slid back into his lap, still open on a half-sketched aircraft design. Equations danced across the page in pencil. L equals 1 thumb x v2 x s cl. To Lynn, it had looked like scribbles. To Cairo, it was the lift coefficient formula. To first class, it was a line he apparently wasn't allowed to cross. Minutes earlier, Cairo had boarded quietly. No entourage, no luxury branding. Just a polite nod, a navy blue hoodie under a pressed coat, and a messenger bag slung across his shoulder. He'd taken his seat like someone taught to never take up too much space. No headphones, no games, no mess. Just the notebook. Always the notebook. But Lynn Bradford had been watching and judging. She'd passed his seat twice already, frowning each time. Something about him, his silence, his stillness, the way he avoided eye contact, felt off to her. Too quiet, too composed, too confident for a kid like him. So when she saw him hunched over the tray table, focused intently on something she didn't understand, her mind filled in the blanks. He's vandalizing the seat. She didn't ask. Didn't verify, didn't hesitate. "Young man, what do you think you're doing?" she snapped. Cairo looked up. "Ma'am?" She snatched the notebook from his lap. "Are you defacing airline property?" "No," he said quickly. I was writing equations. Don't lie to me." "I'm not lying." Her hand moved before her brain did. Crack. Somewhere mid-cabin, someone pulled out a phone and hit record. In that moment, everything froze. Lynn's expression shifted from authority to realization. Her hand dropped to her side. She looked down, for the first time, at the notebook in her grasp. Sketches of fuselages, drag calculations, wing curvature ratios, every line clean, every figure precise, not a single mark on the seat. She'd been wrong, but she didn't apologize. "I thought," she began, voice cracking. "I thought he was tagging the tray." No one responded. The man in 2C whispered to his wife, "He's just a kid." The woman in 3D shook her head, wide-eyed. "He didn't even say anything." Cairo remained quiet, but something shifted in him. A part of him, the part that had spent years learning how to stay small, stay polite, stay invisible, felt itself cracking like ice under pressure. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even embarrassed. Just tired. Tired of pretending that following the rules was enough. 3,000 miles away, in a climate-controlled office in Bethesda, Maryland, Dr. Adrian Ellis leaned back in his chair, sipping black coffee. His eyes scanned the Varigard Core interface, a live system that monitored in-flight passenger conduct across major airlines. Then a red ping flashed. Flight 2731, Skyridge Airways, first class cabin. Child, assault flagged. He clicked it. A thumbnail preview loaded. He tapped play. His fingers froze mid-air as the slap echoed through his screen. Then he saw the boy, his son. No words, no anger, no drama. Adrian closed the video, took a slow breath, and typed a 6-digit access code. Initiate Tier 1 downgrade. Effective immediately. Suspend layered coverage across all Skyridge international routes. He didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't even pick up the phone. Power doesn't always need volume. Back on flight 2731, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're making a minor routing adjustment due to systems feedback from dispatch. Please remain seated. It wasn't a weather reroute. It was a protocol response. Within 6 minutes of the slap, the airline's entire insurance tier collapsed. $1.1 billion in layered policies were revoked. 4 airport alliances suspended Skyridge's priority status, and Varigard's internal ethics system flagged the flight as non-compliant. Cairo didn't know any of that yet. He just sat there, one hand resting lightly on his notebook, his cheek still warm, but his expression unreadable. He felt a weight shift, not in his body, but in the air around him. He couldn't explain it, but somehow, something had moved. 2 rows back, a woman whispered into her phone, "Something's happening. I think this kid might be important." Another passenger looked over. "That wasn't just a slap. That was a mistake." And Cairo? He finally lifted his pen, turned the page, and wrote, "You don't need to raise your voice when you control the system." Somewhere over the North Atlantic, the cabin lights dimmed, but no one was sleeping. Not in first class, not after what had just happened. Cairo Ellis hadn't moved much since the slap. He sat quietly, his back straight, hands folded neatly over his notebook. But around him, a different kind of turbulence had begun, one that had nothing to do with wind or weather. The passengers whispered, glanced, recorded. The flight crew walked stiffly, like they knew something bigger was happening but didn't yet know what. And the woman who started it all, Lynn Bradford, was nowhere to be seen. She hadn't returned to the aisle since the incident. Her name tag was gone, and so, it seemed, was her sense of authority. In the cockpit, Captain Howard Jameson was reviewing a message on the backup terminal screen. Urgent. Varigard Tier 1 downgrade triggered. Immediate revocation of all layered insurance. Ethics status. Non-compliant. Risk class. Black flag. FAA notification sent. His jaw tightened. He turned to his co-pilot. "It's real." "Jesus," the younger man muttered. "We've never seen a black flag trigger mid-flight." Jameson rubbed his temples. "This kid, he's someone." The co-pilot frowned. "Is he a diplomat's son? Royalty? Tech heir?" "No," Jameson said. "Worse, he's connected." Meanwhile, back in row 1A, Cairo finally exhaled. He wasn't scared. Not anymore. Because what Lynn Bradford didn't know, and what the passengers were slowly starting to realize, was that Cairo Ellis wasn't just any kid. He was the son of Dr. Adrian Ellis, CEO of Varigard Global and the lead architect behind the Varigard Core Passenger Ethics System, the very system that rated this airline's ethics scores, determined its insurance eligibility, and decided whether it could fly internationally at all. And now that system was in motion, not out of revenge, not out of anger, but out of accountability. 2 rows behind him, a woman leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Did you see that man's screen? He's watching a live dashboard or something. It said, non-compliant. What does that even mean?" Her husband looked confused. "I think this plane just got flagged." Lynn Bradford sat stiffly in the galley, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She had never felt so exposed. Her phone buzzed, even though she wasn't supposed to have it out. A message from an unknown number. "You just hit the wrong child. Flight 2731 has been red flagged. You'll be met upon landing." Her chest tightened. This wasn't like the other complaints. This wasn't going to blow over, because someone had made a call. In the corporate tower back in Maryland, Adrian Ellis stood in front of a wall-sized digital screen. Dozens of red lights blinked in unison. Airport alerts, risk tier suspensions, alliance level freeze notifications. His voice was calm as he spoke to his legal counsel and Verigard's compliance director. "We're issuing a blanket hold on all Skyridge Airways ESG-linked coverage," he said. "They'll retaliate," the compliance lead said. "They'll file suit," the legal counsel added. Adrian nodded. "Let them." Then he pulled up the still frame of the slap. His son's face. That quiet look. Not of fear, not of outrage, but of calculated stillness. "I want this entered into the ethics archive," Adrian said. "Let the FAA see it during the next congressional ethics review." The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "You're taking this federal?" Adrian didn't blink. "I'm making this permanent." Back in the air, a ripple effect began. At Heathrow Airport, a gate management officer stared at her screen. "What the hell?" she whispered. "Skyridge just lost Tier 1 access. Our 4 premium gates just went red." At JFK, the International Control Tower started rerouting connecting flights away from Skyridge's terminal. At LAX, a financial analyst monitoring flight credit scores sat up. "Why is Verigard freezing all layered coverage for Skyridge? Did something happen?" And in Dubai, a private equity partner received a phone call. "Pull your funding from Skyridge, right now." None of that noise reached Cairo, but he could feel the shift. People who hadn't even looked his way during boarding now looked nervous, kind, careful. A woman offered him orange juice with both hands. A flight attendant he hadn't seen before knelt beside him, whispering, "Do you need anything? Anything at all?" Cairo looked down at his notebook, then at the open cabin in front of him. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. He simply replied, "I'd like to finish my drawing now." In seat 2B, a man in a tailored gray blazer tapped quietly on his tablet. A tech consultant. Quiet. Watching. He recognized Cairo's name. He recognized that name. Ellis. And he leaned back, eyes wide. "Verigard Core," he murmured to himself. "The kid is Verigard Core." 20 minutes later, the captain made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a systems advisory, we'll be landing earlier than scheduled in Dulles International. Please remain seated with your belts fastened." But no one believed the excuse, especially not the flight crew, because just moments before that, an internal message had been broadcast across Skyridge Airways. "Effective immediately, all crew aboard Flight 2731 are placed under ethics review suspension. FAA and Verigard Ethics Board will conduct interviews upon landing. Do not deboard without escort." Lynn read it once, then again. Her hands trembled. She wasn't just being written up, she was being processed. Back in Maryland, Adrian was finishing his 3rd call of the morning. The final call was to a senior FAA official. "We've triggered a Tier 1 flag manually," Adrian said. "This flight crossed a line." "Understood," the official replied. "Do you want to move forward with protocol review?" Adrian's answer was firm. "Yes, it's time we draft something federal." Meanwhile, Cairo finally closed his notebook. The drawing was finished. A sleek aircraft design with wings that curved into the body like a manta ray. Next to it, he'd written in clean block letters, "You can't fix a broken plane with a broken crew." Then he leaned his head back, eyes closed. Not because he was tired, but because he knew the landing would be loud. And he was finally ready for it. By the time Flight 2731 began its descent into Dulles, everyone on board had already felt the shift. It wasn't turbulence. It wasn't the change in altitude. It was the quiet sense that something big was happening, and no one could stop it. Even the cabin crew had fallen silent. No more beverage carts. No more forced smiles. Just stiff movements and a lot of nervous glances. They had all received the same internal message. "Do not deboard without federal escort. All crew under temporary suspension pending ethics review." They were being watched now, tracked, logged. And Lynn Bradford, she wasn't just suspended, she was scared. From her jump seat, she clutched the armrest tightly. Her palms were damp. Her heartbeat thudded like a drum in her throat. She looked across the aisle at Cairo. He still hadn't said anything. He just stared out the window. The early morning skyline of Washington, D.C., peeking through the clouds. The slap rang in her ears again. Not because of what she did. She'd been trained to enforce order in first class before, but this time, it had consequences, real ones. Her badge wasn't just a name anymore, it was a liability. In row 1A, Cairo Ellis sat still as ever, but his mind was racing. He'd read about these moments before, in law books, in aviation reform case studies his dad kept on the living room shelf. He'd heard the term ethical cascade whispered during late-night Zoom meetings between his father and federal regulators. He never imagined he'd be the spark that set one off. But this wasn't about just him anymore. He could feel that now, the weight of it, the quiet power of being seen, really seen, for the first time in a long time. The plane touched down with a heavy thud. As the wheels screeched against the runway and the cabin tilted forward, there was no applause, no chatter, just silence. A minute later, the captain came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. This arrival will be slightly different from standard procedure. Thank you for your cooperation." That's when the passengers saw them. Through the tiny first-class window, black SUVs lined the service road. Uniformed FAA officers, 2 plainclothes federal agents, and a Verigard executive in a navy blue blazer, holding a silver briefcase and a biometric tablet. The door didn't open for another 10 minutes, but when it did, everything moved fast. 2 agents stepped on board. No handcuffs, no shouting. Just firm voices and practiced calm. "Crew, please remain seated. We'll begin individual debriefs shortly." A 3rd agent approached Cairo with a soft expression. "Mr. Ellis, your father is waiting outside. You're safe now." Cairo blinked, not because he was confused, but because hearing it out loud made it feel real. He slowly stood, grabbed his notebook, and followed them down the aisle. Every head turned, not with mockery, not with suspicion, with respect. The terminal was sealed off. No cameras, no reporters, just silence, security, and something colder than both. Systemic power activating in real time. Dr. Adrian Ellis stood near gate B7, hands in his pockets, suit pressed and eyes unreadable. When Cairo walked through the jet bridge, they didn't rush to hug. They didn't cry. Adrian simply nodded. "You okay?" he asked. Cairo nodded once. "You hungry?" Cairo smiled faintly. "Yeah, a little." Adrian rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "Let's handle this first, then waffles." Inside the secure terminal room, the interviews began. Lynn was called first. The Verigard official didn't shout. He didn't even sit. He showed her the video. Then he asked one question. "Do you believe this child posed a threat to cabin order?" Lynn swallowed hard. I thought he was..." "That's not what I asked." "No," she whispered finally. "He didn't." The official nodded, logged her answer, turned the screen off. "Thank you, Miss Bradford. You're suspended from all federal routes effective immediately. Skyridge may pursue internal review. Our record is now updated." And just like that, her entire career shifted from senior crew to liability flagged. Meanwhile, Adrian was on a call with the FAA. "I'm invoking Section 12B of the Verigard Federal Ethics Accord," he said plainly. "That hasn't been triggered since 2018, the FAA director replied. "And this case qualifies. We have child endangerment, racial profiling, and Tier 1 protocol violations, all documented on FAA-partnered footage." "What are you asking for, Adrian?" Adrian looked toward his son, who was sitting quietly in the next room. "I'm proposing a new national policy, the Ellis Protocol." Elsewhere, the airline's executive board scrambled. "Why the hell are we being blocked from Heathrow and JFK?" one shouted. "We just lost $1.1 billion in insurance coverage." Another gasped. "Who is this kid?" The general counsel looked pale. "He's not just a kid, he's Ellis's kid." Silence. "Adrian Ellis?" "Yes, and they're drafting a federal protocol in his name as we speak." The public hadn't even heard about it yet. But inside the FAA's digital control room, the headlines were being written, Child passenger triggers first ethics-based federal shutdown in airline history. 1.1b pulled overnight. FAA and Verigard moved to adopt Ellis Protocol. Skyridge Airways faces industry-wide backlash following first-class incident. And Cairo? He was still drawing. This time it wasn't an airplane. It was a system map. One where flight crews were scored not just on efficiency, but on humanity. Where passengers had a right to silence without suspicion. Where dignity could finally be tracked, protected, and enforced. Adrian watched his son work. He wasn't thinking about PR, or lawsuits, or political fallout. He was thinking about that stillness, that silent control his son had shown on that flight. The power of not yelling when you already run the algorithm. By sunset, 4 airport alliances had severed ties with Skyridge. The airline's CEO issued a rushed apology. The White House Ethics Advisory Board scheduled a hearing, and Verigard Corps' data dashboard showed one final update. New protocol, the Ellis Standard, pending ratification. Status, under federal review author, Dr. Adrian Ellis. Inspired by Cairo Ellis, age 13. That night in a quiet DC diner, Adrian and Cairo finally had waffles. And in between bites, Cairo asked softly, "Did I do something wrong?" Adrian looked him in the eye. "No, son. You reminded the system why it exists." And that was louder than any slap ever could be. The hearing room wasn't made for kids. Cold walls, overhead lights, government-grade carpet with stains older than Cairo. But he sat there anyway, straight-backed, silent, notebook in lap. To his left sat Adrian Ellis, still in his tailored navy suit, calm, watching everything like he was playing chess while everyone else played checkers. Across from them, FAA officials, Verigard executives, 3 senators, and one tired-looking ethics advisor from the White House. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was about to become a reckoning. "Mr. Ellis," a senator began, adjusting her glasses. "Let's start simple. Your son was slapped in first class. That much we know. What we're trying to understand is why a disciplinary incident turned into a $1.1 billion insurance cascade and a full alliance withdrawal from 4 major airports." Adrian leaned forward. "With respect, Senator, you're asking the wrong question." The room stiffened. You should be asking why it took a slap to trigger a system that's been broken for decades. The slideshow began. Adrian had brought data, charts, graphs, heat maps of cabin-based discrimination trends over 5 years. But what landed hardest was the video. Cairo, sitting silently in his seat as Lynn Bradford towered over him, face flushed, hand already mid-swing. No audio, just violence, unprovoked, unmistakable. One senator winced. Cairo didn't flinch. He'd watched the footage already, not out of trauma, but to understand what systems failed and why. When they asked if he wanted to speak, he looked up and nodded. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said softly. "But it wasn't just about me." "Go on," a member of the ethics board encouraged. Cairo opened his notebook, flipped to the diagram he'd been perfecting since the plane landed. "This is the Ellis Protocol," he said. "It's a new passenger protection model." The diagram wasn't flashy. It was simple, clean, color-coded. One side tracked crew behavior, verbal tone, physical proximity, racial bias flagging. The other tracked passenger experience, age, vulnerability index, speech pattern, AI recognition for children and neurodiverse flyers. In the center was a real-time ethics scoreboard. Like a flight safety gauge, Cairo explained. Except it tracks dignity. Adrian watched the room. No one rolled their eyes. No one smirked. They were listening. "You're 13, one FAA official finally said, surprised. "Who helped you design this?" Cairo shrugged. "My dad helped with the technical terms, but the structure? I just thought about what I wished someone had done for me before the slap." That landed like a hammer. Silence followed, then a slow nod from the ethics advisor. Outside the Capitol hearing, the public had already caught wind of the incident. The footage of the slap had leaked. So had news of the Ellis Protocol, and hashtags were trending. Fly with dignity. Ellis Standard. First class is for everyone. Parents posted stories of their kids being ignored, silenced, disrespected on flights. Veterans, disabled passengers, foreign accents, it was all coming out. This wasn't just about Cairo anymore. This was about everyone who had been quietly erased mid-air. The CEO of Skyridge Airways tried to get ahead of the storm. A public apology. Diversity training promises. A PR campaign with vague words like inclusivity and growth. But it was too late. 3 airline coalitions revoked their membership. 2 credit rating agencies dropped them overnight. And FAA issued a federal ethics compliance audit across the entire U.S. domestic flight sector. All triggered by a 13-year-old boy who never raised his voice. Meanwhile, Lynn Bradford's name had been scrubbed from internal crew directories. She'd hired a lawyer, claimed emotional distress, claimed training failures. But in the arbitration hearing, the verdict was swift. Her actions weren't a training failure. They were a choice. She lost her license. Permanently. In a quiet room at Verigard headquarters, Adrian met with the board of directors. "We're going to build this," he said. "Not as a patch, as the standard." They nodded. Some hesitated. One asked, "Do you really think the industry is ready for a dashboard that monitors behavior in real time?" Adrian didn't blink. "I don't care if they're ready. We are." 3 weeks later, the FAA and Verigard jointly announced the ratification of the Ellis Protocol, a digital ethics scoring system integrated into crew performance reviews. A passenger dignity compliance index triggered by biometric indicators of fear, discomfort, or distress. Auto-suspension triggers for aggressive crew interactions with minors. But perhaps most importantly, passengers would be able to see crew ethics scores before booking, just like they do safety ratings and flight delays. Cairo wasn't thinking about all that. He was back in school, same uniform, same walk to homeroom. Except now, teachers smiled differently. Classmates nodded at him like he wasn't just smart. He was something else. At lunch, one girl leaned over. "You really made a law?" she whispered. Cairo grinned. "Not really, just fixed a system." She smiled. "Cool." That night, at home, Adrian watched Cairo sketch at the kitchen table. "You know," he said, pouring tea, "some senators are still debating the cost of implementation, the data, the real-time analytics." Cairo didn't look up. "They'll figure it out." "You think so?" He nodded. "Because this isn't about tech. It's about, finally, being seen." Adrian smiled. "Still want to be an engineer?" Cairo paused. "Maybe. Or maybe I'll design systems that stop people from getting hurt in the first place." As the city slept, one final update rolled across FAA's internal system. Ellis Protocol. Live status, active. Applies to 14,782 U.S. domestic crew members, monitored airports, 39 initial compliance rating, 64%. The system had changed. Because a boy stayed silent, and a father didn't. The media tried to make Cairo a celebrity. They called, they emailed. They offered TV specials, book deals, podcast interviews. But every time, the answer was the same. No thank you. Cairo wasn't interested in being famous. He didn't want a TikTok account with 1 million followers. He didn't want to sit on talk shows next to celebrities. He just wanted to get back to math class, back to building things that worked, things that made sense. Because people were messy. Systems could be fixed. His father, Adrian, understood. That's why the two of them sat quietly on the back porch every Sunday morning, drinking cocoa and coffee side by side, while the world kept shouting their names. "You did something big," Adrian said once, eyes on the garden. Cairo just nodded. "I didn't mean to." "Maybe," Adrian said. "But sometimes the world needs someone who doesn't mean to. They're the ones who don't try to win anything. And that's why they do." But behind the peace, things were moving fast. The Ellis Protocol had gone live nationwide. Now, flight attendants were scored on every interaction. How they addressed passengers, whether they made eye contact with children, how quickly they resolved complaints, whether they showed signs of implicit bias under stress. And passengers, They saw those scores when they booked flights. The dignity of flying had finally become a visible number. For some crew members, it was a blessing. Good ones got recognized, promoted, celebrated. But for others, it was a reckoning. Lynn Bradford's appeal was denied. She wouldn't fly for any commercial airline again. But worse, her name had become a cautionary tale. Corporate ethics training across 3 airline alliances used her video as a case study. The day one choice sparked a billion-dollar fall. Lynn stayed quiet. She'd moved to a small town in Idaho. Her lawyers advised silence. But deep down, she knew this wasn't just about her anymore. It never had been. Meanwhile, in a glass office on the 44th floor of Verigard Global, Adrian was deep in conversation with FAA's ethics director and a team of engineers. "We need to take this further," the director said. "Internationally." Adrian raised an eyebrow. "We're not even 6 weeks in and you want global expansion?" "I don't want it," the man said. "I need it. Heathrow, Narita, Frankfurt. They're asking how to license the protocol." Adrian looked at the screen. On it, Cairo's original drawing, his handmade diagram with the colored boxes and arrows, had now become a dynamic, enterprise-grade AI dashboard. It could now predict crew-patient conflict before it happened, flag emotional degradation signals based on micro-expressions, recommend seat reassignments in real time based on risk zones, all from the quiet mind of a 13-year-old boy who just wanted people to stop being cruel. Adrian exhaled. "Let's do it, but on one condition." The room waited. No branding, no billion-dollar launch parties, just dignity. The room nodded. That week, Cairo was invited to speak at a youth summit hosted by the United Nations. He said no, but instead, he submitted a single paragraph. "I didn't want anyone to get in trouble. I just wanted someone to realize they had a choice before they made it, and now maybe they will. That's enough." The quote went viral, engraved on plaques in airline HQs, shared in classrooms, printed on luggage tags by a non-profit raising money for anti-bullying campaigns. The world wasn't worshiping him. They were remembering what silence felt like and how powerful it could be. On the other side of the country, a 7-year-old girl named Maya boarded her first solo flight. She was scared. Her parents had rehearsed everything. Her teddy bear was tucked in beside her seat. When a flight attendant with soft eyes bent down and said, "Hi, sweetheart, I see you," Maya smiled. Because now, the system saw her too. In an industry built on noise, engines roaring, passengers complaining, captains announcing turbulence, it was silence that made the biggest shift. A boy didn't scream. He didn't fight back. He just drew something on paper that said, "This should never happen again." And now, it wouldn't. The press thought the story was done. Cairo had spoken. The protocol had launched. Airlines had bowed. But Adrian Ellis knew better. He'd worked in systems for 2 decades. He knew public apologies faded faster than press releases. And underneath every shiny reform was an old system fighting to stay broken. It started small. A whistleblower from JetCorps Air forwarded Adrian an internal memo. Pending crew assessment suspensions due to ethics scores must be cleared by regional ops leads. Do not automatically trigger protocol until signed off. Translation: they were stalling enforcement. Another email came in, then another. Crew scores being adjusted manually. Complaint flags disappearing from logs. AI detection turned off mid-flight under pilot discretion. Adrian saw it clearly. The industry was complying on paper, but fighting behind the scenes. He called a meeting. Not in a corporate boardroom, no. He gathered a group of parents, activists, engineers, and pilots in a downtown DC library. No press, no suits, just truth. "This isn't about tech anymore," Adrian told them. "It's about power protecting itself." He pulled up a dashboard of suppressed data, cases where the Ellis protocol had flagged abuse, but the alerts were never escalated. A 10-year-old autistic girl mocked for her stimming. An elderly Filipino man told he smelled ethnic. A wheelchair-bound woman denied access to the lavatory mid-flight. All flagged. None acted on. Cairo sat in the back, scribbling again. "We have a decision to make," Adrian continued. "We can let them water this down until it's just PR, or we activate the emergency ethics clause." The room went still. They all knew what that meant. Buried deep in the FAA Verigard Charter was a clause drafted, quietly, by Adrian himself during the protocol negotiations. It stated, "If systemic protocol suppression is confirmed across 3 or more carriers, the ethics cascade override may be triggered, freezing operational data access across partnered airports until full compliance is verified." No one had ever triggered it. But now, Adrian looked across the room. "We either pull this lever now, or the industry learns they can outweight us." The next morning, Cairo handed his dad a folded piece of paper. It wasn't a diagram this time. It was a list of names, victims, passengers who had reached out to him quietly. Some through their kids, some through social media, all saying the same thing. "It happened to me too." Adrian didn't hesitate. He filed the formal ethics cascade request. It required 3 approvals: FAA Compliance Director, Verigard's AI Security Chief, the Ethics Tribunal Chair. He got all 3 within 18 hours, because deep down, even the regulators were tired. The trigger went live on a Thursday morning. Within 12 minutes, 112 flights were grounded across 4 airlines. 1.1 billion insurance data access was frozen, halting all new policy issuances. 4 major international airports suspended boarding protocols with affected carriers. The press exploded, but the FAA didn't flinch. They issued a blunt statement. Until compliance with the ELA's protocol reaches 94% baseline, cascade lockouts will remain active. This wasn't a slap on the wrist. This was a chokehold. Airlines panicked. Executives held emergency calls. Lobbyists tried to spin it as an overreach. But passengers weren't listening to them anymore. They were listening to each other. Mothers, teachers, disabled veterans, immigrant families. Stories flooded the internet. Every ignored call button, every racial slight. Every time someone was told, "You people always complain." Now the world wasn't just watching. They were remembering. Meanwhile, Cairo went back to school. But things had changed. At lunch, 2 6th graders asked him for help designing an app for school bullying reports. In math class, his teacher used his ethics score model as a logic problem. At home, Adrian walked in one evening to find Cairo holding an envelope. "What's that?" Adrian asked. Cairo looked up. "An invitation." "To what?" He handed it over. It was from MIT. Not for college, yet, but to speak at a symposium on youth-led systems reform. Adrian smiled. "You gonna do it?" Cairo shrugged. "If I go, can we talk about what's next?" Adrian tilted his head. "Next?" Cairo nodded. "Planes were just the beginning, right?" That night, Adrian sat on the porch alone for a while. The sky was clear. Planes passed quietly overhead. And he thought, what happens when a system finally listens to the smallest voice in the room? The answer, it turns out, is everything changes. They didn't plan a protest. They didn't post a hashtag. There wasn't a flashy campaign, or a celebrity endorsement, or a carefully edited trailer. It started with one woman. She walked into the terminal at JFK with her son. He was on the spectrum and afraid of loud sounds. She sat down at gate 44 with a hand-lettered sign. It read, "I'm here because Cairo was slapped, and my son matters too." That was it. No bullhorn, no drama. But someone took a photo, and 24 hours later, gate 44 looked like a vigil. Dozens of parents showed up, then students, then educators, then people who had no idea who Cairo was, but knew exactly what it felt like to be dismissed, erased, treated as disposable. They weren't shouting, they were sitting, holding signs, lighting candles. Some had their kids with them, headphones on, reading books or sketching. This wasn't chaos, it was clarity. Meanwhile, Cairo had no idea it was happening. He was at home, finishing a science project on environmental water filters. Adrian walked in with his phone in hand. "You might want to see this." Cairo looked up. "What's going on?" Adrian showed him the live stream. Gate 44, signs everywhere. The name Cairo printed over quiet faces. One mom holding a sign that read, "If they won't protect you, we will." Cairo blinked. "That's me?" Adrian nodded. "You didn't just create a system, son. You made people feel seen." The news picked it up. The Cairo sit-in, they called it. But it didn't stay at JFK. By the next day, it was in LAX, then Chicago O'Hare, then Hartsfield in Atlanta, then London, Toronto, Accra. It wasn't a protest. It was a presence. Even the CEO of SkyTide Airways, one of the 4 airlines currently locked by the ethics cascade, tried to spin it. "We support peaceful displays of passenger concerns. The industry is listening," but the passengers weren't interested in corporate statements anymore. They were building something different now, a new norm. At one sit-in, a teenage girl brought an iPad and began teaching other kids about how the Ellis Protocol worked. Another built a QR code link tree where people could read stories from victims who hadn't been believed. By day 5, someone created an app, unaffiliated with Verigard, that let users rate their flight experience based on dignity. Not just seats or food or delays, but how you were treated as a human being. In Washington, things moved fast. The FAA scheduled a public congressional ethics review, the first of its kind. They invited Adrian to speak. He said yes, but only if Cairo could speak first. Cairo sat at the long wooden table in a navy suit. He didn't look nervous. He looked ready. Across from him sat senators, advisors, and industry heads. One of them, a skeptical older man, leaned in. "Son, do you really think your little system can fix decades of airline culture?" Cairo didn't flinch. He said, "I don't think a system can fix people, but I think it can hold a mirror. And when people see what they look like, some of them will change, and the ones who won't, at least now they can't pretend they didn't know." Silence. Then applause. From the gallery, from behind the cameras, even from some of the officials themselves. Adrian went next. But his speech wasn't a speech. It was a slideshow. He showed them before and after flight crew logs. Complaints dropped 47% in 4 weeks. Passenger satisfaction rose in flights with 90% protocol compliance. Flight attendants who'd scored high, 84% retention with faster promotions. Children traveling solo reported feeling safer even if no one said a word to them. It wasn't just feel-good fluff. It worked. By the time Adrian sat down, the committee was already drafting an expansion mandate. They wanted every major domestic airline under Ellis Protocol compliance by end of quarter, mandatory ethics reporting in all U.S. terminals, a full audit of all flight-related discrimination complaints over the last 5 years. It had begun. Back in Cairo's school, something happened that surprised even him. His classmates didn't treat him like a hero. They didn't crowd him. They didn't ask for interviews. Instead, they did something better. They started acting like each other mattered. Teachers caught on. The school added a quiet zone for kids who needed breaks. They started using name pronunciation cards during roll call. And they changed the way lunch seating worked so no one sat alone unless they wanted to. One afternoon, Cairo's teacher pulled him aside. "You know, this wasn't just about airplanes," she said. "I know. It was about the kind of world we let people build, or stop them from building." Cairo nodded. "I didn't mean to start anything," he said quietly. She smiled. "Exactly why you were the one to do it." Cairo was still 13, still quiet, still scribbling in the margins of his school notebooks. But the world around him? It had gotten louder, bigger, different. The ethics cascade protocol wasn't just a tech feature anymore. It had become a movement, a global pulse check, something real people were using to hold real systems accountable. And because of that, Adrian Ellis got a phone call from Geneva, from the UN Aviation Compliance Council. They didn't want an audit. They wanted a summit, a global one. It started with a pattern. A woman in Dubai denied boarding because she looked upset. A disabled woman in Brazil denied entry to first class because her wheelchair was inconvenient. A Sikh pilot in Germany grounded because one passenger felt uncomfortable. The airlines weren't just messing up, they were covering up, hiding internal ethics failures under marketing language and selective reporting, until a quiet little dashboard started telling the truth. And the world noticed. So now, the UN wanted the Ellis Protocol expanded, not just in the US, not just for airlines, worldwide. They asked Adrian to come speak, but Adrian said, only if Cairo speaks first. On the flight to Geneva, they didn't take a private jet. They sat in economy, like always. Cairo sat by the window, tapping his fingers softly. Do you think they'll even listen to a kid? He asked. They won't see a kid, Adrian said. They'll see a mirror. The summit hall was bigger than any courtroom or conference Adrian had ever seen. 38 nations represented, dozens of CEOs, policymakers, ethics watchdogs, and across from them, victims, witnesses, quiet citizens with nothing flashy to say, but everything at stake. Cairo waited. When his name was called, he walked up in the same Navy suit he wore to the FAA hearing. He didn't bring notes or a PowerPoint. He just started speaking. My name is Cairo Ellis, he said, calm, even. I made a system to track how people are treated in the air. But this isn't just about airlines. It's about what we let people get away with, because we stopped looking. Silence. I'm not here to make anyone feel bad, but if your system depends on no one watching, maybe the system's the problem. A delegate from Sweden sat back in his chair. A flight executive from Australia stopped mid-scroll on her phone. I didn't design the ethics cascade to punish people, Cairo said. I built it so they wouldn't be invisible. That was the moment, the pivot. Adrian stood next. But instead of taking the podium, he stood next to Cairo and opened a live global dashboard on his tablet. Behind them, the screen lit up. Real-time complaint-to-resolution ratios, passenger dignity scores, crew behavioral trends, countries marked non-compliant due to data suppression. The red zones flashed like wounds. Then Adrian said, you can't fix what you won't measure, and you can't measure what you keep hiding. Some in the crowd clapped, others stayed tense. No one left. Afterward, the ethics committee moved fast. They called a formal vote, and on that day, the Ellis Protocol was renamed the International Passenger Ethics Framework. 31 countries signed on, 14 committed to immediate rollout, the rest under observation. But it didn't stop with flights. 3 weeks later, a metro line in Nairobi installed a version of the passenger dignity score. In Los Angeles, a school district requested a student adaptation of the protocol for classroom culture. In Berlin, a children's hospital built a bedside manner module inspired by Ellis's escalation logs. The idea had spread, not because of noise, because of need. Cairo came home to 2,300 emails. He responded to 3, then deleted the rest. He didn't want interviews. He didn't want a TED Talk. He didn't want to be a face on a brochure. He just wanted people to matter. So he built something new. A free open source platform. Ethics Space. No ads. No profiles. Just a map where anyone could log moments, good or bad, when their dignity was honored or ignored. He linked it to local organizations, legal aid, school programs. No marketing, no press release, and yet it grew. One night, Adrian found Cairo asleep at his desk again. A pencil still in hand. Blueprints for something new half-sketched. Even in your sleep, Adrian whispered, you're building ways to make people feel safe. He adjusted the blanket over Cairo's shoulder, paused, thought back to that day on the flight. 6 minutes. That's all it took. 6 minutes from a slap to a cascade that shook the world. And it all started because one boy refused to shout back. He just told the truth and let the system speak for itself. It had been 3 months since the Geneva summit, and while the cameras had moved on, the ripple hadn't stopped. Not in boardrooms, not in airports, not in homes, and certainly not in Cairo's world. Because now, every system was watching the skies differently. 1. The first airline falls. The first airline to break under the weight of the Ellis Protocol wasn't American or European. It was Aerolus, a mid-tier carrier based in South America with a spotless marketing image and a rotten ethics core. 2 months after Geneva, Ethics Space flagged over 200 unresolved reports of abuse, most involving disabled passengers. And worse, 87 of those had been actively suppressed. Cairo didn't publish an exposé. He didn't even speak. He just pressed verify on a flagged dataset. Within 48 hours, the FAA and the Brazilian Aviation Authority had launched a joint investigation. Within 72 hours, Aerolus's flight approvals were frozen. And within a week, $280 million in funding vanished. Their CEO issued a tearful apology, but the system didn't blink. 2. Cairo's new problem. Cairo wasn't at home when that happened. He was in Harlem, visiting his cousin, eating chicken tenders in the back of a noisy diner. And that's when he got the text from his dad. "They want you on the cover of Time." He stared at the screen. "No thanks," he typed. Adrian didn't argue. He just sent back a thumbs-up emoji. But something had shifted in Cairo too. He was starting to realize that being known wasn't the problem. It was what people expected from you once they knew you. Teachers expected him to be the model student. Journalists expected him to speak for all children. Programmers expected him to lead the next wave of AI. Strangers expected him to never mess up. And that weight, it wasn't just pressure, it was loneliness. 3. The Student Forum. One night, a group of teens on Ethics Space created a private group, Voices Behind the Screens. It started small. 6 students from 6 countries, all around Cairo's age. Some had been bullied on flights. Others had reported racism at school. A few just felt invisible. They weren't famous, but they were fierce. And when they invited Cairo to join, he hesitated until he saw one message. "We don't want a leader, just someone who knows what it's like to be heard too late." That night, Cairo logged in, not as Ellis Protocol founder, not as Geneva speaker, just as Kai. And for the first time in months, he laughed. 4. The Backlash. Not everyone loved the New World Order. A coalition of executives from legacy airlines filed a formal complaint to the UN Aviation Board. They accused the Ellis Protocol of bias, overreach, and threatening operational stability. In short, they wanted it scaled back. Some claimed the scoring system was too subjective. Others argued that dignity ratings couldn't be quantified. But their biggest fear? Transparency. Because the Ellis dashboard was now public in 19 countries. Passengers could see in real time how their airline ranked. And that meant accountability couldn't be buried under PR anymore. Adrian was called to testify before the Global Aviation Subcommittee. He brought no legal team, only a graph. It showed a 62% drop in in-flight discrimination complaints, a 38% increase in crew retention, a 400% spike in passenger satisfaction scores. Then he said, maybe the problem wasn't the system, maybe the problem was the silence before it. The motion to repeal failed by a vote of 26-3. 5. The airport incident. And then it happened again. In Atlanta, Gate C-27, a black girl named Amira, just turned 9, was traveling alone to visit her grandmother in Detroit. She was seated in business class. The gate agent asked her, "Are you sure you're in the right place?" Then she asked again, louder. Then she reached for the boarding pass and tore it. A nearby passenger caught it on video. The clip went viral. In under 40 minutes, EthicSpace flagged the incident to Sky Vista's live ethics dashboard. The airline suspended the gate agent. But it was too late, because someone noticed Cairo had liked the post. And to the internet? That meant the Ellis Protocol was watching. 6. Congress comes calling. Within days, U.S. lawmakers moved to fast-track a new ethics compliance requirement, inspired by the Geneva Agreement. It was dubbed the Passenger Rights Transparency Act. It required every domestic airline to publicly disclose monthly crew behavioral scores, incident resolution time, passenger dignity reports. Cairo and Adrian were asked to testify again. But this time, Cairo brought someone else. Amira. She stood beside him at the podium, nervous, holding a drawing in her hand. Cairo spoke first. No protocol can stop injustice from happening, but it can make sure it doesn't stay hidden. Then Amira spoke. I just wanted to go see my grandma. I didn't know I'd be a problem. The room went quiet, then erupted into applause. The act passed unanimously. 7. Cairo's choice. After the hearing, multiple companies reached out to Cairo. Offers, sponsorships, internships, even a position on a European tech ethics board. He said no to all of them. Instead, he used his own savings and some funds from ethics space donors to do something else. He created an annual fellowship for youth innovators, not for gifted kids, but for kids who had been ignored, silenced, or underestimated. The application wasn't about test scores. It asked one question: what's something you've seen that the world still pretends not to? Within 2 weeks, 3,000 applications came in. 8. Back to the sky. On a chilly spring morning, Cairo boarded a flight to Nairobi. He was visiting a new pilot program using the Ellis Protocol in public transportation. As he settled into his seat, a flight attendant stopped beside him. She looked at the name on the manifest, then back at him. "You're that Cairo?" she asked. He nodded. She paused, then smiled. "I just wanted to say, thank you. My sister works at an airport in Lisbon. She told me how things changed after your system went live." Cairo smiled, said nothing, just looked out the window. 9. The system keeps working somewhere over the Atlantic. An alert quietly blinked on the ethics space server. Pattern flagged, crew suppression detected, Bangkok to Seoul. It was reviewed, verified, logged. Another ripple in the system, another moment that wouldn't be buried. Cairo didn't need to press a button or make a speech. The system was doing what it was built to do. Not punish, but protect. Not accuse, but expose. And for the first time since that slap in first class, the world finally understood something Cairo had known all along. You don't have to be loud to make a system listen. You just have to build one that doesn't ignore the quiet. There's a moment, just before the wheels lift off the ground, when the world feels suspended. That's how Adrian Ellis felt, sitting in the window seat beside his son. He wasn't thinking about the past few months, the hearings, the headlines, or the lawsuits. He was thinking about how small the world had once made them feel, and how much louder their silence had become. 1. The system stays on. The Ellis Protocol was no longer just an emergency switch. It was a living framework, running, reporting, learning. Airlines in 42 countries had adopted it in full. 8 more had signed on conditionally. Every airport that wanted federal support had to comply with passenger dignity scoring. Ethics Space had crossed 50 million user-submitted entries, and no one could suppress the truth anymore. Even the smallest moment, a scowl, a shove, a slur, could now echo through the system. Cairo didn't log them for punishment. He logged them for accountability. 2. The trial. But not everyone accepted that. A federal judge had finally scheduled the trial against Skyvista Airlines, the airline where Cairo had been slapped 9 months ago. The case wasn't just about one crew member or one bad day. It was about negligent ethics management, data suppression, and discrimination of minor passengers. The airline brought a massive legal team, suits and folders and cold smiles. Cairo didn't bring lawyers. He brought receipts, digital logs, time-stamped escalation reports, internal emails flagged by the Cascade system, and one silent video, the footage from that flight. No voice, just that moment when the slap landed. And Cairo blinked, once, then turned back to his tablet. The courtroom was still for almost a minute. Then Adrian stood and said, He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just logged it, because he knew the system would remember when no one else did. The judge ruled in their favor. Sky Vista was fined $210 million. But more importantly, the ruling made history. It established that emotional abuse against child passengers could be grounds for ethics-based federal sanctions. A first and a warning. 3. The Brooks Protocol. Cairo wasn't the only one rewriting aviation. Another quiet force emerged during this movement. Ayanna Brooks, the girl who had exposed planted evidence in a viral video during a separate ethics breach, was now working with FAA oversight committees. Together with Adrian in Cairo, she co-authored the Brooks Protocol, a regulatory requirement forcing all airlines to train cabin crews in nonverbal de-escalation for children, implement in-flight ethics response logs, use real-time biometric consent notifications for minors during flight disruptions. It passed unanimously and became federal law 6 months later. 4. One last call. Late one night, Cairo received a call from someone unexpected. Senator Loretta Banks, chair of the Federal Aviation Oversight Committee. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "I've seen a lot of people build tools to punish. You built one to protect. We'd like to fund a national expansion of your protocol into schools, buses, hospitals." Cairo didn't speak for a moment, then said, "Only if we don't call it mine." She laughed. "Fine, but we both know whose name they'll remember." He smiled quietly and agreed. 5. The world keeps going. Cairo turned 14 quietly. No parties, no speeches, just pancakes, soft music, and a walk through the neighborhood with his dad. They passed by a mural, painted on the side of a public library, a painting of a young boy holding a tablet with the words, "Dignity doesn't require permission." Cairo looked up and said, "I didn't want to be a symbol." Adrian smiled. "You're not a symbol, Cairo. You're a system, and systems don't fade. They upgrade." 6. Across the sea. In Tokyo, a group of university students adapted the Ellis Protocol into an elderly passenger dignity system. In Lagos, a tech nonprofit used Cairo's core API to launch Safe Commute, a bus dignity score system across 3 provinces. In Denmark, a school board voted to adopt Ellis-style dignity logs to flag classroom bias. None of them asked for Cairo's permission. He liked it that way, because it meant the work wasn't about him anymore. It was bigger, smarter, stronger. 7. Home again. One evening, Cairo sat on the same porch where it all started. Same chair, same view. His tablet was off. The dashboard still blinked softly on the server inside. Another ping, another report, another moment. He didn't need to check it, because the system wasn't his anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told to be quiet, everyone who'd been moved, mocked, or ignored, everyone who wanted to matter, and now they did. 8. Final note. Adrian stepped out, carrying 2 mugs of hot tea, sat beside his son in silence. No speeches, no instructions, just one quiet sentence. "I'm proud of you for not trying to be powerful, but for building something that makes others feel safe." Cairo nodded, looked up at the stars, and whispered, "I didn't build it to win. I built it because I lost. And I didn't want anyone else to feel that way again." And somewhere in the quiet hum of global systems, a new alert was logged. Dignity preserved, 10:42 p.m., no intervention needed. The world had changed, because one boy had once been slapped in silence and decided silence didn't mean invisible. Not anymore. By now, most of the world had stopped asking who Cairo Ellis was, because Cairo wasn't just a name anymore. He was a standard, a protocol, a quiet revolution. It started as a nickname on social media. Someone called a court ruling in line with Cairo's law. It was casual at first, until an education board cited it in a policy update. And then, 3 weeks later, Congress passed the actual legislation. The Cairo-Ellis Dignity and Data Rights Act of 2031. It became the first federal law guaranteeing ethical digital protections for minors across all public systems, especially transportation, education, and healthcare. It required data visibility for children involved in flagged incidents. It made real-time alerts mandatory, and it gave guardians the right to review and contest behavior logs logged by public-facing systems. Some fought it, said it would slow down operations, said it was a snowflake overreach. But for every critic in a tailored suit, there were millions of kids who had once been dismissed for being too dramatic. And now they had a word for what they wanted: dignity. When the law passed, Adrian asked Cairo how he felt. Cairo just nodded and said, "It's not about how I feel. It's about how many people can finally breathe." Silicon Valley noticed. A top-tier firm reached out with a 7-figure offer to consult on a global initiative. They promised funding, global exposure, full control. Cairo turned them down. Instead, he released a fully open-source version of the Ellis Protocol, stripped down for youth use, free for all, no licensing, no permissions required. Grassroots teams across 10 countries picked it up. Kids with second-hand laptops and no budget were now building real-time ethics systems in classrooms, buses, shelters, and rec centers. And one of those kids was a 13-year-old girl in Mumbai named Riya Patel. Her younger brother had been kicked off a city train by a guard who said he looked like trouble. He was 8. So Riya took the Ellis Core and built her own, a mobile ethics log called Echo Watch. It tracked public transit interactions anonymously and logged escalation patterns. In 6 months, Mumbai's transit authority adopted Echo Watch citywide. Within 2 years, it ran in 5 countries. She never met Cairo, but she sent him a handwritten letter. "You made the system. I made it see me. Now others will see too." One evening, Cairo sat on the porch swing with his grandma. She had a blanket over her lap, and they watched the wind move the trees. She said softly, "I used to wish the world could pause when someone was hurt, just long enough for someone to notice." He didn't answer with words. He just pulled out his phone and showed her the live ethics space map. Dots blinking across the world. Incidents logged. Dignity levels rising and falling in real time. She blinked, then whispered, "It's not a pause, but it's a start." But systems aren't perfect. One day, an ethics alert flagged a false positive on a boy traveling through Madrid. The incident went unreviewed for 3 days due to a glitch in the Ellis dashboard. Cairo found out from the boy's father, angry, frustrated, betrayed. Cairo didn't blame the glitch. He took the call. "I'm sorry," he said. "The system failed, but I won't." He and Ayana patched the error, published the fix publicly, and added triple alert redundancy to future builds. That moment didn't go viral, but it mattered, because leadership without transparency is just another silence. The following spring, Cairo was invited back to Washington, this time not to testify, but to speak. He opened the International Ethics in Infrastructure Conference. He didn't wear a suit, just a black hoodie, jeans, and worn sneakers. He walked on stage, looked out across a room full of powerful people, and said, "We keep trying to fix the world by punishing bad people, but bad systems are what let good people stay silent. We don't need louder people. We need systems that don't go deaf when we whisper." Silence, then a standing ovation. Afterward, an older woman approached him. She worked in airline security, been in the industry for 30 years. She'd once feared systems like his, afraid it would turn staff into scapegoats. Then she told him about her niece, reassigned safely mid-flight after a co-pilot made a racist joke. The dashboard caught it. The system protected her niece quietly, quickly, without punishment. Just correction. "You didn't turn us into targets," the woman said. "You gave us shields." People kept asking Cairo what he would do next. Politics? A startup? A foundation? He didn't want any of that. He launched the Silent Catalyst Fellowship instead, a global program for teens building quiet systems of protection in unnoticed spaces. Schools, clinics, foster homes, refugee centers. 50 kids, 27 countries, all under 18. The night before his 15th birthday, Cairo stayed up late, not to celebrate, but to write a short message for the Ethics Space homepage. The goal was never justice. The goal was remembrance, because you can't build fairness on forgotten pain. He powered off the screen, and for the first time in a long time, let the silence wrap around him, not as a threat, but as proof. That silence didn't mean forgotten anymore, because now, systems listen back. The plane was quiet again, not because people forgot, but because they finally understood. The story of Cairo Ellis had circled the world and landed, once again, where it started, 37,000 feet in the air. This time, it wasn't a slap. It wasn't rage. It wasn't silence out of fear. It was recognition. A woman in business class, about 50, whispered to her seatmate, "That's the kid, isn't it?" Across the aisle, a flight attendant straightened her posture, as if the atmosphere had just shifted. Even the pilot, during boarding, stepped out of the cockpit and quietly nodded at the boy walking past. Not as a celebrity, not as a threat, but as someone who had changed everything. Cairo sat by the window, earbuds in, watching the clouds roll by. Ayana sat next to him, sketching something on her tablet. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Every few minutes, his watch gently pulsed. Nothing urgent, just system updates. Passive dignity pings from flights across 5 continents. Most were green, a few amber, one flickered red. He tapped twice, flagging it for review. He didn't even look up. It was second nature now. Not power, not control, just responsibility quietly accepted. At the back of the cabin, a boy, about 10, tried to lift his luggage into the overhead bin but struggled. A passenger nearby stood to help, but so did one of the newer flight attendants, younger, nervous. She caught herself, locked eyes with the boy, and smiled before she said, "Would you like a hand or prefer to do it yourself?" The boy looked surprised, then nodded. "Your choice," she added. That wasn't in any airline training manual. That was culture shift. That was Cairo's legacy, playing out not in courtrooms or headlines, but in the micro moments people used to ignore. When they landed, nobody applauded. There was no ceremony, no press. But as Cairo walked off the plane, the captain called out gently, "Thank you, Mr. Ellis, for what you gave the sky." Cairo just smiled and kept walking. Outside the airport, Adrian was waiting, dressed casually in jeans and a black long coat. He looked tired, but proud. "How was the flight?" he asked. "No incidents," Cairo replied. Adrian nodded. "That's becoming the new standard, huh?" Cairo shrugged. "We're getting there." Ayana slipped away to greet her mother, giving them space. Father and son stood in the parking lot, quiet under a gray afternoon sky. Then Adrian asked, almost hesitantly, "You ever think about taking a break?" Cairo looked up, and for the first time in a long time, he said, "Yeah, I do." Adrian blinked, surprised. "Really?" Cairo nodded. "But not because I'm done, because now, others know how to carry it." He pulled out his phone and showed Adrian a real-time map. But this time, it wasn't airports. It was classrooms, shelters, even a public library in Lagos, all linked into the Ellis Protocol under the new Silent Sharing Initiative. Adrian looked at it, stunned. "You did this without me knowing?" "No," Cairo said softly. "We did this without needing permission." Back home, as Cairo lay in bed that night, he stared at the ceiling. The protocol would keep running. Ayana and the others would keep building. His name would be attached, sure. But what mattered more was what had been disconnected from him. This wasn't about one boy anymore. This was about systems that could survive without the boy who triggered them. And in that quiet, he allowed himself one simple truth. He had been struck once, in a cabin full of strangers. Now, across the world, tens of thousands of people would pause if that ever happened again. to anyone. And this time, they wouldn't be silent. Before we go, if you've made it this far, thank you. But now, we want to hear from you. Have you ever seen or experienced something unfair, but no one said a word? What do you think dignity looks like when no one's watching? And if you could design one rule to protect people in public spaces, what would it be? Drop your answers in the comments below. Let's build something better, one story, one voice at a time. And tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to know how far this story travels.